truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Friday, May 26th, 2023, the 856th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'm your moderator. So yesterday we talked at length about the entrance of Ron DeSantis into the nomination race, the GOP primary. Ron DeSantis wants to be the candidate of the Republican Party, and apparently promises have been made to Ron that it will be rigged and stolen in his favor, because otherwise there's absolutely no chance he could win, and everybody knows it. Now, I know that that is a very sensitive subject for a lot of people who have stayed mostly in Normieville and really like and respect what they've seen of Ron DeSantis on television. But I don't want to spend another episode focused on Ron. I bring all this up to say that there's this very strange reaction from normie Republicans, all of whom are supporting Ron DeSantis. They're very upset that anyone would say something bad about Ron DeSantis because they all believe that Ron DeSantis is the future of the Republican Party. And if Ron DeSantis is exposed as what he actually is and not the mythology of Ron DeSantis that they have created him to be, then somehow we enter this very bleak future where Target and Bud Light will always be rich and dominate our lives. But that's not true. We don't need Ron DeSantis. And it's not our duty to the Republican Party to protect Ron DeSantis. We don't actually have to welcome a debate with Ron DeSantis. And it's not because we're scared of Ron DeSantis. It's because there's absolutely no reason to put up with any of it. It is not helpful to anything to bring Ron DeSantis into the picture unless the ultimate goal is to make Donald Trump much stronger. And to that extent, it's fine. People want to be able to repeat all the dumb and awful things said about Donald Trump by the mainstream media and by the Republican establishment, who has been against Trump now for 8 years since he came down that escalator, and by all of the villagers out there who hate Donald Trump. All of that stuff is fair game because the Ron people claim that everybody knows this stuff about Donald Trump is true. In fact, they tell us you can see it with your own eyes as long as you never actually watch any full Trump speech anywhere and you just pay attention to the clips you see on the news and on social media. Then, of course, you can totally see it with your own eyes. They say you're not allowed to be mean to Ron and you're not allowed to even argue with Ron's supporters because they're our betters and they're right no matter what, even though they've been wrong the entire time for the last 8 years about Donald Trump, Donald Trump supporters, and every single important issue our country has faced in that time. They went along with Russiagate. They went along with Mueller. They went along with very fine people on both sides. They went along with the Ukraine impeachment hoax. They went along with everything COVID. Oh, they stopped before the Democrats did. What an accomplishment, normies. Oh, you did it. You're better than the worst by a little bit. Congratulations. They went along with mail-in balloting. They pretend that widespread mail-in balloting is the only way that elections were rigged and defrauded, ignoring the Hunter Biden laptop, ignoring the interference of the law enforcement community, the intelligence community, the Democrats and Republican establishments who were both involved in seeding the initial Russia hoax and trying to undermine Trump in 2016 and every moment since. They've gone along with all of it. They went along with the insurrection narrative, and then they supported sending well over $100 billion to Ukraine because Vladimir Putin is a very dangerous dictator and we need to protect Ukraine's sovereign border. Yeah, sure, guys. Okay, what else do you want to be wrong about? Because it's been everything, and now you're telling us that you need to weigh in this conversation again, and that we need to allow it. Not only do we need to allow it, we need to welcome it. Otherwise, we are dividing the party that you have occupied for decades and decades while this country has gone into rapid decline. So, sorry, you've already weighed in. You weighed in post-2020 when you covered up and ignored widespread, obvious, and overwhelming evidence of stolen elections all across the country at every level, from your local school board all the way up to President of the United States of America. You cannot say that Donald Trump is responsible for a culture of losing when you looked at easily won elections, refused to support them before the election, aided Democrats in enacting measures like the 2020 consent decree in Georgia between Brad Raffensperger and Stacey Abrams, allowing the regime to steal elections. And then you covered them up afterward and said they were very safe and very secure and blamed Donald Trump for the losses. You have weighed in plenty. Now your advice and your opinion is not needed and not respected and not welcome. You're allowed to say it. No one's stopping you from saying it. We are not trying to censor you, even though, by the way, we're about to see Republicans, the normie Republicans supporting Ron, the Ron-servatives, we're about to see them enact a cancel culture and enact a censorship campaign against us. And I'll be talking about that in just a minute. We are going to see that in the future over this next year. Mark my word. But we're not trying to censor them. They can say whatever they want. And then we get to make fun of it because they say the most insulting, disrespectful, disgusting things about Donald Trump and his supporters every single day. And they've been doing it for 8 years. So you don't just get an open goal to kick the ball into. I know that's more fun, child brains, but you don't get to do it. You already weighed in. Your weighing in was the choice to make sure that MAGA candidates would not be allowed to take office. They're making fun of Kari Lake for losing, while there is video evidence of how the ballot signature verification goes. And it's just, yes, approve everyone. Click, 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 click. Approve every single one. Hundreds of thousands of ballots that are quite obviously unverifiable, and they just don't care. They blame election fraud on other things and say it's Donald Trump's fault for losing. No, it's the Republican establishment's fault for not standing up while elections are being stolen in broad daylight. That is your culture of losing. They want to win on their terms by their measures, and everything else counts as losing. Well, if that's the rules, then welcome to the game. We will play by those rules. They are trying to destroy Trump. They are trying to destroy MAGA. who do you think that they are doing that on behalf of? Is it the American people? Well, it can't be the American people, can it? It's just the Republican Party. It's just the uniparty right. And the uniparty right, who are they helping? Just the regime. So really, who is backing Ron? And why does the group of people backing Ron just so happen to be the same group of people that denies our elections are stolen and that went along with everything else for the last 8 years? Now, I bring this up because this edgy normie on Twitter named Allie Beth Stuckey, she's been around for a while. She used to be involved with various mainstream normie conservative outlets. She's got 415,000 followers on Twitter. And as you might imagine, she is a very committed Ron person because, of course, she is. There is strong social incentive for people who are friends with a lot of liberals to support Ron because Ron is the okay guy to liberals. That's the guy where liberals are like, okay, well, yeah, I know the Democrats have messed up, so it's probably their turn. And like, Ron's not that bad. I mean, I guess he's just like a normal guy, so okay. And then Republican and Democrat villagers get to tease each other as if they're on a schoolyard and flirting because they don't know how to talk to each other. And they feel really good getting their Ron DeSantis points. Ooh, I showed him this time. I voted for Ron. That's where all the elitist social credit in the Republican Party comes from. If you got a little R next to your name and you are playing a social credit game, then you got to be on board with Ron. Now, so Allie Beth Stuckey yesterday posts this. She says, question from someone who voted for Trump twice. Why are Trump primary voters the meanest, maddest people on the internet? And then she left a crying, laughing emoji on there. Now, her post has been seen 287,000 times with fewer than 3,700 likes. She's got 253 retweets. Now, I responded to her because that is a question that she clearly doesn't know the answer to, and she thinks that she can make fun of Trump supporters by claiming that we are the meanest and maddest people on the internet. So I wrote back, because we're witnessing people lie to gain power while pretending to be on the good side, because we've been censored for years and still are, because we watch the GOP elite and establishment, support the illusion of Joe Biden's legitimacy and ignore his career of political criminality, because we watch the GOP call us extremists and terrorists right along with the communists. You literally allowed the country to be usurped, and now you're taking the side of the usurpers. That's why. Because you think it's important that Ron win a rigged election. You all think everyone wants to be your friend and wants to beg you to agree with us. But you all accepted and supported treason. You don't get a safe space. That was my answer to her. Now, my answer to her, I have around 19,000 followers. She has 416,000 followers. This is her post. My reply to her post has been more widely shared than her post. What does that tell you about what people out there actually think? And I'm not sure if I mentioned this on the episode yesterday or not, but the social media accounts for all of the major Ron supporters and the Ron DeSantis official campaign accounts and Ron DeSantis' own account are all getting blown up and ratioed constantly. People need to understand that all of the arguments they're about to see play out in the mainstream media and in the news, in the conservative media, all the Trump DeSantis stuff that will inevitably be talked about on the Daily Wire and Fox News and The Blaze and National Review and commentary and all of that other nonsense. Those debates have already played out online. They've been going on for 7 months, and the Ron people have lost dramatically. Okay, this doesn't have to be divisive. The point is that it's already over. And the only thing that truly matters through all of this is that the people supporting Ron are the same people in the regime who thrust the COVID narrative upon us and stole the election and covered up the election. And Ron DeSantis is part of each and every bit of that. And his hired group of supporters have been never Trump for 8 years. It's not a mystery what's going on here. We are not going to make nice with the regime so that we can protect Ron. We don't need to protect Ron. Ron is not some special unicorn. It doesn't matter what you've seen on television the last few years that pumps him up. He met with Rupert Murdoch not that long ago, talking about how Fox is going to give Ron their full and complete support. This isn't complicated. Ron cannot simultaneously fight the regime while being supported fully by the regime as their Donald Trump alternative, knowing that the regime is actually horrified of Donald Trump, the man they've been attacking for 8 straight years. That's the sort of thing that's indisputable. The regime isn't afraid of Ron DeSantis. That's why one of their media outlets has made Ron their candidate. He is literally the candidate of Fox News. He's literally the candidate of the corporatist and globalist Republican establishment. I didn't make it this way. Trump supporters didn't make it this way. We didn't choose what Ron is. We didn't choose the people supporting him and backing him, whose support and backing he's accepting, whose narratives he's repeating. We didn't make Ron do this stuff. Ron is right now serving the regime. Now, if that is some illusion and Ron is doing it to trap them, wonderful. Then at the end of this, he'll be greeted as a hero and everyone will applaud him and we will think it was an honorable thing for him to take this hit that he is taking. Congratulations to Ron if that happens. But otherwise, this is a pure chase for political power from the same regime who's done all this. There are only two sides, and it's not Trump or the other side. It's either you're for the global regime or you're not. And if you can't prove you're not, if you can't talk about stolen elections, what are we supposed to think? You're welcome to come into the debate, but if you are the guy you seem to be, then we're not going to be nice to you. And we don't owe you that. It's not our responsibility to protect the Republican establishment when the Republican establishment chose to give away majorities last year, 7 months ago, when Ron won by 20 points in Florida and won by 12 points in the Jacksonville area, that all of a sudden just turned into a 4-point Republican loss in the Jacksonville mayoral race, a 16-point swing in 7 months, something that is totally and completely impossible if either A, Ron is that popular, or B, Florida's elections are clean. If both those things are true, and we're told that they must be, or else you can't talk about Donald Trump losing elections, then that result in the Jacksonville mayoral race can't happen. But it did happen, so one of those things must not be true. And since there's reason to believe that Ron DeSantis is popular in Florida, then the only one left is that Florida has easily stolen elections and Ron DeSantis won't say a word about it. And here's the thing. I know that a lot of people on our side about basically everything agree with us about 99% of stuff. And they still just don't like Trump. They have an emotional reaction to Trump. They don't like his voice. They think he says dumb things that steer everybody off course. They don't like all the drama and the outside stuff. I get it. That's fine. That is a preference position. Okay. And I understand that those people don't spend a ton of time on the same subjects we all spend time on. But one of those subjects is election fraud. And if you think it's not a problem, then you haven't spent enough time on it. If you think it's just something that can be solved with ballot harvesting or ballot chasing or a different approach to mail-in balloting, you are wrong. I don't know what else to say about that. Okay? The Daily Wire and Fox News and all the legacy conservative media outlets have not chosen to tell you the truth about that one thing. They're not lying about everything else and telling the truth about Donald Trump and about election fraud. That is not happening. Election fraud is not some small problem. Election fraud exists at every aspect of the election system. The voter registries are filled with fraudulent registrations. Dead people, illegal aliens, ineligible voters, people who have moved. Sometimes they've moved multiple times and have multiple registrations within one state. And they keep voter registration open on the day of the election, up to and on the day of the election, so they can supply whatever new voter registrations they need to reach the number. That is not a problem of mail-in balloting and how good Democrats are at gaming that system. That's got nothing to do with it. This is a massive point of fraud in our election system. The people they choose to send out all these mail-in ballots to all of those registrations, millions and millions of ineligible registrations everywhere across the country. California surely has the most. Other states have hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And we see voter roll purges, some of them brought on by work from Judicial Watch, 170,000 just gone in Pennsylvania. Well, why did you have those 170,000 there in the first place? And are those all of them? Well, no, those aren't all of them. And that's just one step of the process. They send all those ballots out. They know where those ballots go. Who's going to go chase them down? Republicans who are just going to go knock on people's doors? Is that going to work? No, the Uniparty knows where those ballots go. The Uniparty gets those ballots and assigns them to whomever they like. And there's no restriction on how those ballots can be brought back into the process. There's no way to ensure that a voter is even attached to those ballots. So you can't just say that's a mail-in ballot operation that they do better than we do. That's not what that is. So they control the registries. They control who the ballots go to. They control how the ballots get back, how the ballots are cast, and then how the ballots are counted. And even if they did the ballot counting perfect from a human level, the machines can still influence it. And that's not just some conspiracy theory. That is a well-documented fact that people nonetheless avoid because they don't want to believe the problem is as bad as it is, because if they admit that, well, then a whole lot more problems arise that they just don't have time for. So not only have they introduced fraud and manipulation and malfeasance at every single step of the process, they've also infiltrated the court system. They have a massive legal operation to enact lawfare to maintain and fortify the election results around the country. All of that is exactly what we've seen. So no, that's not a Democrat operation doing better than the Republican operation. This is not the sort of thing that Ron DeSantis can fix. It's the sort of thing that the people pushing Ron DeSantis's candidacy don't want to fix. It's the thing they want to keep in place. They want to keep the regime in place, the power structure in place. They want to convince Americans that there is actually no problem with our elections. And who could do that better than Ron DeSantis? If Ron DeSantis can beat Joe Biden from his basement, well, that must mean that our elections are okay. And then we just have nothing but regime forever, as Ron DeSantis pretends to protect us from the global agenda while the 2030 agenda advances at pace unstoppably. Why should anyone believe that the Bush family or Karl Rove and Paul Ryan and Rupert Murdoch and the Kochs and Ken Griffin and all of the other globalists throwing in for Ron are doing so because they've just changed their mind about their goals? Nah, you know what? We've just been listening to too many MAGA podcasts and we realized that globalism was really bad. And, we're not Trump guys. So what we're going to do to fight globalism, even as globalists, we've realized it's really bad. What we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to support Ron DeSantis because he is going to help us eliminate the global regime and its global agenda, because we as globalists know it better than anyone. We know how bad it is, and we have come to stop it by electing Ron DeSantis. We just, we have this thing about Trump's voice. We can't listen to him, and he said mean things about us before. So he was right about the globalism stuff. We have decided to back off globalism forever. But in order to do that, we're going to have to put Ron DeSantis in place. Trust us. That's what we're being told. So, hey, guys, no deal. No deal. I'm sorry. We can still be friends because obviously you're going to come around. And I understand that this period is frustrating because nobody wants to actually think that those MAGA people were right the whole time. I get it. I mean, we have been right the whole time. And sooner or later, somebody might just notice that and think, hey, maybe these people who are right all the time are on to something. Maybe we would be better off guiding our decision making and the way we view the future, taking into account what they're saying rather than calling them stupid and crazy for 6 months or a year until the thing they've been saying the whole time proves obviously true to everybody. And we just switch to calling them crazy about something else. Like at some point, people are going to have to just wrestle with the fact that politics as they've been sold it throughout their lives is not what the real thing is. Okay? This is not your opportunity to express yourself emotionally about which of the characters you want to hand your special rose to. No one is trying to get you to like or love Donald Trump. We don't care. All we're asking is, hey, you see this? You see what's happening? Just look at what's happening. Notice what's happening. Understand what's happening. Understand who they're targeting. Doesn't all that seem, bad? Horrifying? Maybe to the point that it threatens all of our future collectively? So now that you see that, is Trump's voice and his mean tweets, are they the most important things about your decision in politics? We have to get out of that mindset. If we want the world to be a certain way, we actually have to act so that the world can become that way. And that isn't achieved by deciding from a range of characters we are presented by the television which character we think seems most like us. And it's worth reiterating that if we are the crazy conspiracy theorists who are consistently proven right again and again and again, it does make sense to listen to us in advance. Now, what prevents everyone from listening to us in advance and making better decisions so that the regime actually can be dealt with? Well, that is that very same regime applying propaganda and censorship to all of us. And it comes from the very top. And it's the very top of both sides, the uniparty left and the uniparty right. Who's not part of the uniparty left or the uniparty right? Trump and MAGA. And maybe you could make an argument for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't think you can make that argument successfully at this point, but we can see, we can be patient. We can see what he brings to the table. Maybe he is fully rejecting the regime, and that would be wonderful. It remains to be seen. The only person reliably doing that is Donald Trump. He also has the biggest political movement in the history of this country behind him in that project. But let's remember what the other side thinks, what the actual elitists in the uniparty think about the public conversation. This is Barack Obama doing an interview with former NFL player Nate Burleson on CBS News. They did a long piece doing PR for Barack Obama's program called My Brother's Keeper, MBK. This is a globalist investment into urban communities to bring up all these arts programs for inner city youth of color, where they become rappers, not good rappers, just rappers. And supposedly all of this solves gun violence. Put a lot of money into the black urban community to create 3 or 4 rappers, and that solves gun violence, according to Barack Obama. But here is the interesting part of this interview.
But I find myself falling into this space where I have concern about the country that they will inherit once I'm gone. Post-presidency, what about this country keeps you up at night?
The thing that I'm most worried about is the degree to which we now have a divided conversation, in part because we have a divided media, right? So I'm much older than you, Nate.
You don't look it, though.
That's what I was fishing for. But when I was coming up, you had 3 TV stations.
Yeah.
And people were getting a similar sense of what is true and what isn't, what was real and what was not. Today, what I'm most concerned about is the fact that because of the splintering of the media, we almost occupy different realities. If something happens, in the past, everybody could say, all right, we may disagree on how to solve it, but at least we all agree that, yeah, that's an issue. Now, people will say, well, that didn't happen, or I don't believe that. And one of, I think, the goals of the Obama Foundation and one of the goals of my post-presidency is how do we return to that common conversation? How can we have a common set of facts? We may disagree on gun violence in terms of what the best prescriptions are, but we can't deny the data that says the United States has levels of gun violence that are 5, 10, 15 times more than other countries. So if we say that it's just a mental health problem, well, it's not like there aren't people with mental health problems in those other countries. What's the difference? This is probably the difference. Now, we can have a debate, but at least we've agreed on some facts.
Wow. You know, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, specifically the part when he talked about media being fractured and how we now occupy different realities. So there's rarely common ground that we find as a country when it comes to issues that are ripping us apart. And working in media, it gave me a different perspective on what we do. And it also allows me to look in the mirror. How well are we doing the job of making sure that both sides of whatever spectrum can at least see truth and then start a conversation after that?
Well, that's the thing. I've never heard it put that way, a divided conversation. He didn't even use the phrase divided country. He used divided conversation. That I've never...
Ooh. Ah, yes. Doesn't it feel good when Barack Hussein Obama's words wash over you? I don't know whether I should just keep praising Barack Hussein Obama or I should praise myself for loving Barack Hussein Obama. That is Oprah Winfrey's best pal, Gayle King, certainly not her wife, although maybe she is, I don't know. And then we have good old wide receiver Nate talking to Barack Hussein Obama, a man who has absolutely committed treason against the United States and was directly involved in attempting to undermine the presidential campaign of Donald Trump and knew about spying on Donald Trump's administration and has laid the predicate for absolutely everything we're seeing now, including the election steal in 2020 and whatever is going on in the illegitimate administration now. But what does Barack want? He's talked plenty of times about misinformation and disinformation. I think it was at Stanford last year where he gave that talk. He wants tech censorship. He is a proponent of the censorship and propaganda regime. He signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act that brought in the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act that allowed U.S.-made propaganda to foreign countries acceptable within the United States of America. And now what he wants is to create a common conversation where we are centered on the facts, as they tell them, about gun violence in America. We all have to believe the data. Just like when we had to believe the COVID data, right? Everything was data. Trust the data, trust the science, trust the experts. The experts are in fact the science and are in fact the data. So if you have data that is not approved of by the experts, that becomes not data. That's misinformation. That's a conspiracy theory. You gotta listen to the experts talk about the data. Otherwise, you have no way of knowing what is data and what's not data. You can't just take any old data and call it data just because it's data. You have to have data that is trusted by the experts and trusted by the science. Is Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci tells you about the data. Therefore, you don't even need the data. You just need Fauci. And listening to Fauci is what it means to examine and trust the data. So we have to have all the same data about gun violence. And once we have compiled that data and once we trust that data, then we can have a common conversation about that data and what we then must do to respond to that data, or else be part of the problem. The reason why so many kids die from gun violence, even though, of course, in that interview, not in the clip I played, but Nate Burleson repeats the false claim that guns are the number one killer of children in our society. So this is how it's been presented to us for years. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. That's what we've been told. That statement on its face sounds reasonable, sounds rational. Everybody can have the way they feel about the world around them, but there is still an objective, empirical reality out there that we all must contend with and we must see as roughly the same in order to have a society in the first place. We need to understand things like the grass is green, the sky is blue. If you jump off that cliff, you're probably going to die. Stuff that you just can't avoid about physical reality. Now, data and studies are not that kind of reality, though we are lied to about them. Everybody knows the phrase, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. Statistics create the easiest ways to lie, and they are used to lie all the time. Again, as we can see with COVID, as we could see with the vaccines, as we can see with the reported election results. Statistics are especially useless when they are compiled to prove something about the world that is obviously false. That's usually why they get the statistics together, because they want to say that the thing that everybody understands to be naturally and obviously true is actually wrong based on the data. So statistics are bad in that case, but they're even worse when they're being lied about in the first place, as in this case. So they're talking about gun deaths for children. Do they mention the fact that children in these studies are counted as up to 19 years old in these situations, sometimes even higher than that? Because that kind of changes the whole thing around. They present it as though guns themselves are so dangerous that children are just finding guns at their parents' house, loaded, and then accidentally killing one another. This is the leading cause of childhood death. They're ignoring the fact that the gun deaths are being racked up by people in their late teens and, depending on the study, sometimes early 20s, in Democrat cities replete with gang violence, because there are 17 and 18 and 19-year-olds in those gangs killing each other. That's not a gun problem. That's a gang problem. The gang problem is caused and exacerbated by the regime, and specifically the uniparty left part of that regime. And knowing that, it becomes pretty clear that they're lying about the statistics. But for Barack Obama's purposes, statistics represent an objective reality, and everyone must agree to that objective reality, or they can't participate in the common conversation. What we need is a common conversation. We need those old days when there were only 3 sources of information. Everybody got information from one of those sources. Those sources all said essentially the same thing, and everybody believed the same story. The good old days, back when we could convince the American public that John F. Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman and not any element of the CIA or the U.S. government. You know, the good old days when we had a common conversation and everybody believed all the same things. That's what we need to get to. And instead of social media making that goal harder to accomplish, there are ways that we could use social media and the new modern information flow to accomplish that original goal of everybody believing the exact same thing. And that's what we need to do. So we need to create organizations, and if we need to change laws to allow those organizations to function properly, we can do that too. We can employ different agencies of the federal bureaucracy, give them all their individual responsibilities. Some can be involved with just fact checking, and we'll fact check all around the world through our State Department and CIA. And it'll all be sponsored by the globalists and philanthropists, the best people in the world. And then we can create other agencies, and those agencies will work with the social media companies to censor mis and dis and malinformation as soon as we decide what those terms mean. And it's always changing, of course. So sometimes things are true information and then become misinformation or disinformation. And sometimes things are misinformation and disinformation and eventually become true. But the point is that we need to be able to censor any mis and disinformation for as long as it is mis and disinformation. We just need to be able to censor. How are we going to do that? Well, here's one of the ways they do that. So, as most of you know, I'm part of Badlands Media, and John Harold, Patel Patriot, is the founder for Badlands Media and the public face of Badlands Media, and he got an email yesterday from an organization called NewsGuard. And I'm going to share this email with you because it's very interesting and it's very instructive on how these people think about censorship. The email heading is Press Inquiry, NewsGuard's Analysis of Misinformation on Substack. Hello, Mr. Harold. This is, and she gives her name, a journalist with NewsGuard, a company that reviews and rates news and information websites for various metrics of credibility and transparency. I'm writing to you because my colleagues and I are working on a report based on an analysis we recently conducted of Substack newsletters that publish misinformation. Your newsletter, Patel Patriot's Devolution Series, and Badlands Media were 2 of 60 we found to have spread misinformation. Our report mentions the fact that you've published podcast episodes on Substack advancing false claims about U.S. elections, including one episode in which you claimed that both the 2020 election and the 2022 midterms were stolen, and one episode in which you claimed that True the Vote was accurate, that the 2020 election was stolen. Think about how low grade these claims are and how they're just saying these are inaccurate claims. These are false claims you're advancing, saying that the 2020 and 2022 elections were stolen. Now, how are they going to support the assertion that these are false claims? They would have to have evidence to support that, right? This is what they say. However, top election officials in all 50 states affirmed the integrity of the 2020 election, according to a New York Times report. This is NewsGuard. This is how they approach truth. I mean, they are an organization for truth. This is how they approach it. Numerous federal officials and independent observers have reached the same conclusion. In a November 12th statement, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, part of the Department of Homeland Security, called the 2020 election the most secure in American history, stating, "There is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised." Then Attorney General William Barr told the Associated Press on December 1st, 2020 that, quote, "We have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election," end quote. And we know, of course, that Bill Barr wasn't investigating. But what about that CISA statement? Well, last June, CISA released a new statement about that old statement. And in the new statement, it turns out that there are vulnerabilities all over the election system, including in the machines. This is from UncoveredDC.com last year, June 6th, 2022. The headline, this is Wendy Strzok Mahoney. CISA advisory report admits voting machine vulnerabilities, denies exploitation. So the machines are vulnerable, but nothing bad happened. And they list a bunch of vulnerabilities. Here are some. Mutable attestation, which could allow the, quote, disguise of malicious applications on a device. Totally safe, totally secure. Hidden functionality with the potential to give an attacker elevated privileges on a device. This is from the CISA report. Improper protection of alternate path, which allows for rebooting in Android safe mode, allowing direct access to the operating system, which could lead to escalation of privileges or the installation of malicious code. Path traversal, the ability to manipulate and cause arbitrary code execution, which could in turn, quote, spread malicious code to ImageCast X devices from the election management system, end quote. Execution with unnecessary privileges, allowing the execution of code to elevate privileges. Authentication bypass by spoofing, making the machine vulnerable to forgery. Incorrect privilege assignment, with the potential to expose cryptographic secrets used to protect election information, with the additional potential to affect other election equipment. And original validation error. This vulnerability makes the ImageCast X susceptible to forgery, and an attacker could leverage this vulnerability to print an arbitrary number of ballots without authorization. And of course, they list all the ways that they intend to fix that. But those are the vulnerabilities, and you can't very well say that the election is the most safe and most secure in all of American history with those kinds of vulnerabilities in the machine, and that is only one aspect of the process. Nonetheless, for the keepers of truth at NewsGuard, both of those claims about Bill Barr and about CISA are hard and fast truths that exist for all time because they were said that way once 2.5 years ago. And so you're not allowed to talk about anything that disputes that 2.5-year-old false information that has already been disproven by reality and exists in the mainstream media as disproven. So the mainstream media has now accounted for the true and false positions on each one of these claims, but we at Badlands are only allowed to talk about the truth or falsity of those claims so long as it corresponds with the view they are trying to project. Otherwise, we're spreading misinformation that just so happens to reflect the same exact things said by major media organizations. Smart. In regards to the claim that some of the 2022 midterm elections were stolen, there is no evidence for this either. All of these elections were certified by top election officials. Moreover, those who have challenged the election results, such as Kari Lake in Arizona, have either lost or had dismissed their lawsuits for lack of evidence. That is not why their cases were dismissed. Almost all the election cases that were dismissed were on procedural grounds. Kari Lake's case is under appeal and still very much alive. There is more than ample evidence about the uncertifiability of hundreds of thousands of votes in that election, to the point where no one should believe it's possible that Kari Lake actually lost that election, because of course she did not. And just to top it off, by the way, Katie Hobbs's chief of staff has already left. She's already resigning. Katie Hobbs has now endured multiple staff departures. Why? Because she's illegitimate. That's why. Imagine being a staffer for an illegitimate governor when everybody everywhere can see that you stole your election. That's the scenario right now. Has the TV agreed to it? Have the villagers said, yeah, we get it? Nope, not yet. But is that your standard for belief? Whether or not the TV agrees, whether or not the villagers agree, they can make fun of you all day and night for saying, yeah, it's obvious that the election is stolen. If you can't stand up to that withering attack of some degenerate loser saying that you're wrong or crazy, I don't know what to tell you. It's really not that big of a deal. You just say, okay, commie, you don't really believe that, do you? You can't believe something so moronic, commie. Hey, let me show you this video where this guy, who's supposed to be doing ballot verification, just taps the button over and over and over again. No matter what the ballots show, as soon as one pops up on screen, he clicks the button. Again, just yep. They're all perfect. They're all perfect. You know, it's funny because they listed those 274,000 ballots as being verified in under 3 seconds each, 70,000 being verified in under 2 seconds. The reason that it takes 2 or 3 seconds for these people to verify each ballot is because sometimes they slow down in loading, and sometimes the people take a break. It's not because they're actually examining them for 3 seconds. They're not examining them at all. They just pop up on screen and people hit yes, end of story. But back to this email. We also found on Badlands Media that you have published false claims about COVID-19, Ukraine, and the 2020 election. One article claimed that the COVID-19 pandemic was engineered. However, the COVID-19 pandemic was very much real and not engineered, resulting in nearly 7 million deaths. There is also no evidence to suggest that the virus itself was engineered. Do these people really believe that? Or are these just statements that they are making in a way to, put pressure on us? Like we're going to be stupid or scared of NewsGuard and we're going to adjust what we're saying to NewsGuard specifications? I mean, this is the sort of writing and the sort of argumentation that wouldn't work in a 7th grade book report. This is honestly pathetic. And this is the organization that sits at the very high, lofty position, being able to decide truth and falsity for the public. It's incredible. Another article advanced the claim that the U.S. staged a coup to overthrow the Ukrainian government in 2014. That is 100% true. However, while it is true that the U.S. supported the Maidan revolution, there is no evidence supporting the claim that the 2014 Maidan revolution in Ukraine that led to the ouster of then-President Viktor Yanukovych was orchestrated by the U.S. government. On the contrary, it had all the markings of a popular uprising. Well, again, that's not true. There is actually an audio recording of Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland talking about who was going to replace Yanukovych. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, directly involved. Lindsey Graham, John McCain, directly involved. George Soros, directly involved. We have read on this podcast the Soros plans for the economy of Ukraine after they overthrew the government. There's also been an ethnic civil war being waged in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, for the last 9 years. That sprung up after that coup. And we're supposed to just agree with NewsGuard that it's false and stop talking about it? This is insane. Another article claimed that the 2020 election was stolen, which, as noted above, was not the case. Well, why did you post it again? We probably have 1,000 articles that claim that, because it is the case. Do you stand by the claims made in these podcast episodes? Can you comment on why these claims were published? Please get back to me by Tuesday, May 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern if you would like to comment on any of these things. Thank you for your time and consideration. Best, and she leaves her name, and her email signature says journalist at NewsGuard Technologies. And exactly as he should have, and also exactly as I advised and agreed, John simply wrote back LOL and posted all of this on Twitter. Now, you always want to know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with one of these major censorship organizations. And so let's go ahead and check them out a little bit. And a great place to start always is influencewatch.org. So NewsGuard was founded by 2 veteran journalists and news entrepreneurs named Stephen Brill and Gordon Krovitz. Here is a little bit about NewsGuard. NewsGuard gives approved websites a green check and denotes untrustworthy websites with a red exclamation point. When users install the browser extension, the appropriate symbol appears on any article they access from one of NewsGuard's 6,000 reviewed websites. NewsGuard uses 9 weighted criteria to evaluate whether or not to rank a news organization as trustworthy, sorting the criteria under credibility and transparency labels. So if you want to be taken seriously by very, very stupid people who have put the NewsGuard browser extension into their web browser, well, you got to do whatever you got to do to get that green check mark so that everyone knows you're okay. NewsGuard ranks the credibility of news organizations based on whether or not they publish false content, present and gather information, quote unquote, responsibly, correct published errors, clearly delineate between news and opinion, and avoid using deceptive headlines. On transparency, NewsGuard rates organizations on whether they disclose their ownership and financing, clearly label advertisements, reveal potential conflicts of interest, and provide the names and contact information of writers. Now, is any of that important at all? No, it's not really important. You see, we should, at some point, decide to become adults about how we receive information. And we don't look to any certain person or organization as a system of authority that tells us only right things, because we don't exist in a world of only right things. We exist in a world of an objective reality to which we have some access in our immediate presence and very little access beyond that. And the rest of it is just a great morass that we have to figure out how to navigate through on our own. It's our responsibility to think about whether or not we are going to accept as true that which is told to us that we cannot prove ourselves. And the number of opportunities we have to do that are actually very small. Most of what exists in the world is stuff that is unknown and stuff that is unknowable. Nonetheless, we cannot avoid interacting with the unknowable, so we have to figure out some way for ourselves to continually and consistently make good judgments about that stuff and about how to proceed. We don't need warning labels on absolutely everything. We don't need to participate in the infantilization of ourselves by the regime. Hey guys, just so you know, that stuff over there, that's no stuff. We can't look at those. No, we can't look at those articles. No, press the X, press the little X. We can't look at that article. No, we can't look at that article. Okay, yes, that's better. New York Times, yes. Green check, yes. Look at that article. That's right. Nope. Click that little X. We're going to stay with the New York Times article because they're approved. You get it? No, you can't have ice cream. And if you open that Badlands Media site up one more time, I'm going to chain you up in the basement. Wait, send you to your room. I meant send you to your room. Of the 10 largest newspapers in the United States, USA Today, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Tampa Bay Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and the Wall Street Journal all received a perfect 100 score from NewsGuard. Newsday received a 92.5 score after being marked down for not disclosing its financing. Bad news day. The New York Post received a score of 75 after failing all 4 transparency categories. Those people are just not responsible. Remember how they put out that Hunter Biden laptop story that was misinformation at the time and now is just obviously true and was then, but was still misinformation then? Yeah, they only get a 75, even though they're one of the nation's oldest newspapers. So NewsGuard is a sick and stupid joke employed by stupid people to make them feel like they are getting the best information when they consume mainstream media content. And naturally, as ridiculous child-brained villagers, they don't really wrestle with the fact that they are adding browser extensions that go directly to these people. Hey, you know what I want to do is open up my web browser to the worst possible people in the world. I'm not tracked enough. Let me figure out a way to track myself more. Ooh, NewsGuard. And as always, you know my favorite part of InfluenceWatch.org. I want to follow the money. I always want to see the money. I want to see the leadership. I want to see the money. So here we are, leadership and investors. NewsGuard is led by co-CEOs Stephen Brill and Gordon Krovitz. Brill founded the American Lawyer and Court TV, while Krovitz worked as a columnist and publisher for the Wall Street Journal. Other NewsGuard leaders include Eric Efron, former executive editor of The Week and editor at Reuters. James Warren, former Washington bureau chief of the New York Daily News and managing editor of the Chicago Tribune, and Amy Westfelt, former editor at the Associated Press. Oh, what resumes. The NewsGuard Advisory Board features several high-profile, left-of-center political officials. These include former Clinton administration White House Communications Director Don Baer. The NewsGuard Advisory Board also features 3 Obama administration officials, including former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, former Director of Policy for the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and Public Engagement Kavita Patel, and former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy Richard Stengel. Despite its predominantly left-leaning members, the NewsGuard Advisory Board also features several officials from the George W. Bush administration, including former Secretary of Homeland Security Tom Ridge, former CIA and NSA Director Michael Hayden, and the former speechwriter for Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. The NewsGuard also lists the left-of-center John S. and James L. Knight Foundation as one of its investors. What kind of organizations are supported by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation? Well, how about this little list? Coding It Forward, Center for Civic Design, Center for National Independence in Politics, Center for Public Integrity, Center for Rural Strategies, Center for Tech and Civic Life, CTCL. Oh, man. Is that Zuckerberg organization that got directly involved in the theft of the 2020 election? Oh, man. Yeah, that's exactly that organization. Isn't that crazy? The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, they sponsor NewsGuard. They also donate to the Center for Tech and Civic Life. Well, the Center for Tech and Civic Life helped to rig the 2020 election. Mark Zuckerberg paid for drop boxes. They paid for election judges all over the country. But I know. The Democrats just outperformed us on mail-in balloting. I know. It's got nothing to do with all this other stuff. I get it. Just mail-in balloting. Got it. The Center for Tech and Civic Life, directly involved in stealing the 2020 election, funded in part by the same people who are funding in part NewsGuard, who is now emailing us that they are going to try to censor us and censor Substack because we are communicating misinformation about an election that their own funders were directly complicit in helping to rig. Incredible, isn't it? I mean, look at what we are dealing with here. The Columbia Journalism Review, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Democracy Works, the Fair Elections Center. We're still just doing the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Hopewell Fund. Very, very globalist. Wait, what's this? They also fund PBS? So the guys who fund, in part, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, directly involved in rigging the 2020 election, also fund, in part, NewsGuard, this censorship organization that rates other groups on whether or not their information can be trusted. The same people that pay for both of those things are also helping to fund PBS, which gives us the information. Well, what else do they fund? Oh, they also fund the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, which is the group that runs PolitiFact, which does the fact checks on which organizations like NewsGuard give their ratings. All of it's funded by the same people? How could it be? They also fund partially the Sundance Institute, the Tides Center, so they work right along with George Soros there, and Unidos US, which used to be La Raza, and that is an organization specifically committed to getting illegal aliens everything they need in American society, including, eventually, the right to vote in our elections. My. Isn't that crazy? How about NewsGuard? But let's go off of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and return to NewsGuard specifically. And what we learned right before we went on our little tangent? NewsGuard's advisory board features multiple people from the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, and the George W. Bush administration. Now, we are told in the Republican and Democrat paradigm that these three administrations should be at each other's throats. We had the Democrats, and everything was good with the Clintons. Then we had George W. Bush, and things were very, very bad. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Fool me and it won't be fooled again. And then George W. Bush handed it right off to Barack Hussein Obama, who wants us to have a common public conversation. So we have the Democrat establishment, the control system behind the last three Democrat administrations, including the illegitimate one currently pretending to hold power in the United States of America, Joe Biden. Barack Obama runs that. Let's not be silly. Hillary Clinton is influencing that. Let's not be silly. We know how these things work. And they are doing the same thing. Former Clinton and Obama administration officials are involved with former Bush administration officials in running this censorship network sponsored by people who also sponsored the election rig, the fact-checking organizations, and our public broadcasting system, as well as countless other global philanthropic NGOs and organizations. The Uniparty left and the Uniparty right both working together to censor independent journalists who are telling the truth and are and were correct about every issue mentioned in that email as mis and disinformation. Isn't that incredible? So the George W. Bush former administration officials are going after people like us for saying the things we say about the elections, Ukraine, and COVID. Because the thing is, the things we say about the elections, Ukraine, and COVID are all correct, and they are all in specific and direct opposition to the regime. That's why they're a problem. That's why the Uniparty left and the Uniparty right come together to solve that problem through censorship in hopes. You got to understand that what they are doing here is an attempt to get Substack to take down people like us. And if that fails, their next step is to try to take down Substack. You remember last year when they began threatening Spotify, and all of a sudden, people like me had our podcasts removed from Spotify. That's what they're going for, the Uniparty left and the Uniparty right. We threaten the regime with the things we say, the information that goes out. People learn that information. They understand it's true. They check it out for themselves. They can take and accept what seems true to them. They can reject what seems false to them. They can fact check us. They can say that we're wrong. We interact with them. There is an interplay. And it turns out that by and large, in the big picture, we are right consistently over and over and over and over and over. That is a problem for the regime. Now, what else is a problem for the regime? Trump is a problem for the regime. MAGA is a problem for the regime. Why? For all the same reasons, obviously. Who is not a problem for the regime? Ron DeSantis, which is why they're supporting him in opposition to Trump. The same people supporting Ron DeSantis are involved with projects like NewsGuard. The Bush political machine, to whatever extent it still exists, supports Ron DeSantis. The Republican globalists support Ron DeSantis. And you can decide whether or not to care about that. You can decide whether or not you agree with it, whether or not you prioritize that. Maybe you have something you like about Ron DeSantis that overrides the fact that the entirety of the regime is supporting him in this primary as an alternative to Donald Trump, because the last thing they want is Donald Trump in that general election. Because what are they going to do? Create 90 million, 100 million votes for Joe Biden to win? Donald Trump is reported to have 74, 75 million votes in the 2020 election, a full 20% increase from the 2016 election. Donald Trump got more popular over his 4 years in office and is more popular now than he was on November 3rd of 2020. So how many votes would Joe Biden need to create to beat Donald Trump again? Whatever it is, it would be a number so ridiculous that no one in the world would ever believe it. So they can't have Trump in the general. Can they rig primaries? Of course they can rig primaries. Do they rig primaries? Yeah, they sure do. So what's the plan? Well, the plan is rig the primary for Ron. Will they abuse the legal system in order to do that? Yes, they will. And the DeSantis simps are out there trying to claim new legal issues for Donald Trump. They were trying to drum up for real on Twitter. Kurt Schlichter and some of the other simps were trying to drum up this new controversy about Trump campaign finance emails in order to create a brand new legal issue for Donald Trump. That is what they are doing. And we are supposed to be hands off and let them do and say whatever they want. Because if we speak up and we say, hey, commies, we understand what you're doing. We know you have that little R next to your name and you pretend to care about everybody's rights so much. But we can see what you're doing. You're doing the very same thing they did in 2015 and 2016, the uniparty left and the uniparty right working together to take down Donald Trump. Well, right now we see you as the uniparty right trying to create new legal issues in order to take down Donald Trump because you can't possibly beat him and everybody knows it. So why, again, are you doing the same things they did to him back then, pretending that we are the ones acting like the left, and then begging for mercy every time someone calls you out about it? Sorry, guys, it's just not going to go down that way. There are only two sides, the side of the regime and the side battling the regime. And if you can't prove that you're on the side who's battling the regime, then we have nothing to talk about. And Ron can't prove that. If and when Ron does prove that, wonderful. Then he will be accepted. But right now, with his supporters, with the style of attack, going after Trump's supporters on arguments that are so preposterous and dishonest that they cannot be believed by any person who is actually paid attention. We were all awake in 2020. We watched this stuff happen. You can't just revise history a few years later and tell us we have to accept the new version and we have to be nice about this new version and pretend it's not bullshit. We know what happened and no one is going to buy it. Sorry, guys, there is no Ron. The Ron-servative movement is never going to happen. You don't have to like it. You don't have to turn around and support Donald Trump afterwards. You don't have to like us. We don't care. Go ahead and join the Lincoln Project. We are going to focus on making sure the country has free and fair elections, because if we do, then we are going to roll you. So why would we care if you are in the Lincoln Project? Everybody's allowed to have their own opinion, right? We're supposed to respect everyone else's opinions. We're supposed to be nice to everyone else. If you're asking me to be nice to you and be respectful to your ignorant views, well, then shouldn't you be nice to me and be respectful to my informed views? No, it doesn't work that way because we're deplorables, we're crazy, we're the conspiracy theorists. We aren't deserving of respect, but you are our betters, so we must respect you even while you're wrong and even while you are subverting this country. Well, no deal. We can have our opinion. You can have your opinion. If you don't like Trump, then you don't have to vote for Trump. You can go in the Lincoln Project. You can vote for Joe Biden. You can pretend to start a third party around Ron, but no one would ever even take that seriously. Whereas if we start a third party around Trump, we will still have the most people in our party. That's just it, period. There's no other way around that. MAGA is at least 70, if not 80, if not 90% of the Republican Party in this country. You screw MAGA over, you lose all those people to a third party. Good luck at that point. And you're going to try to take us hostage and say that if we don't support people with little R's next to their names, we're ruining the country? No one's going to buy it. You wanted to play hardball. This is hardball. No one on this side is scared. We're all prepared for it. We're good. We've already dealt with the Democrats. Donald Trump has already dispatched the Clintons and almost completely the Bushes. You think he can't take down Ron DeSantis? and the weird band of merry retards supporting him on social media? Of course we can do that. We would love your support. We would love your friendship, but we're not going to grovel for it, and we're not going to lie for it, and we're not going to allow you to lie about Donald Trump and us in order to make your point. We're going to say, no, sorry, that's wrong. Just like we have the rest of the time. And riddle me this, guys. How were we going to get out of any of those COVID situations if not for Trump and his supporters? If MAGA wasn't around in 2020 and MAGA wasn't speaking up and MAGA wasn't listening to Donald Trump as he told us every single piece of information we needed to know how and why the media was lying to us, how would we have gotten out of that? It was just going to, stop? Everybody was just going to see Ron DeSantis' model in Florida and follow it? Well, that's not true. That would be a revision of the past. None of that was true. None of that was possibly going to be true. And none of us are going to put up with these constant revisions of history in order to satisfy our betters as we move forward. And hey, I say it with love. Now, it's Memorial Day weekend coming up. I am going to take the day off on Monday. I know that happy Memorial Day is not exactly the right way to frame things. It is a somber day of remembrance for people who have given their lives in service of this country and its freedom. And so I hope that we can all take some time to reflect on that and also enjoy ourselves and some friends and some family, maybe a picnic, a nice cold beer or a cocktail or whatever makes you happy. And I will be back on Tuesday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's high!